who were wrongly convicted in Scotland finally get the justice they deserve?
Mr Speaker, officials from the UK Government are working with their counterparts from the various devolved administrations, including the Scottish Government, to fully understand the legislative options that are available across the respective jurisdictions. I'd like to reassure the honourable member that it remains a priority for all concerned to ensure that those sub-postmasters receive justice and the compensation to which they are entitled as quickly as possible, irrespective of where they live in the United Kingdom.
Alexander Stafford.
Please, sir.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, oil and gas is and will remain a vital sector for the UK. The UK Government is committed to supporting this industry. That is why last week I attended the Grangemouth Future Industries Board with other UK and Scottish Government ministers on the transformation of the Grangemouth oil refinery. The introduction of the Offshore Petroleum Licensing Bill demonstrates our ongoing investment in this industry.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, sir. My right honourable friend knows that Scotland has the potential to be one of the world's most advanced producers of hydrogen, and oil and gas companies play an important role in this transition. What is his department doing to support oil and gas companies who employ a huge number of people in Scotland and in my own seat of Rother Valley in building their hydrogen production, transmission and use capabilities to ramp up the production of hydrogen so we can get more of this low-carbon energy we so need?
Minister.
Grateful to my honourable friend for that question. We anticipate that by 2030 the UK's growing hydrogen sector could support more than 12,000 jobs and unlock £11 billion worth in private investment. Our hydrogen production delivery roadmap sets out proposals for annual hydrogen allocation rounds from the year 2025 to 2030, helping to provide certainty for the industry. In December, we announced the results of hydrogen allocation round 1, with Scotland fielding 2 successful projects.
Mr Speaker, it's the renewable sector in Scotland providing the greatest job growth in Scotland's energy sector, with the number of jobs in the renewable sector in Scotland growing by more than 50% in 2021. And the future of Scotland's job security, energy and economy lies with renewables. So when will the UK Government finally match support for the Scottish Government's £500 million Just Transition Fund?
Mr Speaker, well, I mean, the SNP's position on energy, and particularly in relation to oil and gas, is frankly all over the place. We don't know where the First Minister of Scotland stands on this. He described developing Rosebank as the wrong decision, but now seems to think that oil reserves can fund capital investment in an independent Scotland. We fully recognise the importance of the energy sector to Scotland. That includes oil and gas, it includes renewables. I will continue to work with all parts of the energy sector to develop that for the Scottish economy.
Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government's funding for levelling up has now reached more than £2.9 billion. That's £2.9 billion, Mr Speaker, in Scotland. This includes almost £900 million of new funding announced last year. That's the equivalent of £535 per person in Scotland. The total is set to rise with millions of pounds of further investment in 2024.
Chris Law.
Mr Speaker, the Minister for Levelling Up will meet with me on Friday, but sadly this is not a courtesy that's been extended to the Leader of Dundee City Council, who's repeatedly invited the Minister to a round table in the city to discuss funding critical to projects such as the Eden Project and the Life Sciences Innovation District, amongst others. I've sought to continue the long-term investment regeneration of the city through these projects in the Tay City regional deal, so can the Minister assure me that he will urge his colleague to include in these our discussions on Friday, and his dreadful lack of engagement is from a UK Government that's committed to levelling up and not an outgoing Government winding down?
Mr Speaker, the UK Government is investing more than £60 million in projects in Dundee, and these projects have been identified as key priorities by Dundee City Council and other local partners. Now, he mentions the leader of Dundee City Council. After receiving £20 million for Dundee from UK Levelling Up funds, the SNP leader of Dundee Council recently said, "This is just the UK Government element. I'm pursuing the Scottish Government as well, because we need both governments to work with us if we're to make significant economic inroads into the challenges we face." So, Mr Speaker, I hope the honourable member will now agree with me and agree to write a joint letter with me to his SNP colleagues in Holyrood asking, where's the money? Where's the money?
Now we come to SNP spokesperson Tommy Shepherd.
Here, here. Thank you, Mr Speaker. On behalf of myself and my colleagues, I'd ask the Minister to convey our condolences also to the Secretary of State. Mr Speaker, we were given assurances prior to Brexit that the structural funds which provided capital funding for Scotland would be replaced by the specific levelling up and shared prosperity funding after Brexit. Can the Minister say how that funding now from those sources compares with what it was prior to leaving the EU?
Mr Speaker, 4 years since the United Kingdom left the EU, the UK Government has announced more than £1.4 billion for new levelling up initiatives across Scotland. This exceeds the entire 7-year budget for the EU structural and investment funds for Scotland for 2014 to 2020, roughly £780 million of funding. So do not accept the analysis that the honourable member presents.
Tommy Shepherd.
Well, no, it doesn't actually, Mr Speaker, because this government has a tendency to draw all sources of capital funding into its levelling up myth. I'm talking about the specific levelling up fund and the shared prosperity fund, and they have given Scotland £471 and £212 million respectively, and that is exactly £98 million short of the £780 million that came from the EU structural funds. So when can we have the money, please?
Exactly.
Mr Speaker, the honourable member is simply not correct. £2.9 billion has been invested by this government into the communities, the length and breadth of Scotland. I know SNP members opposite have fought tooth and nail to stop that investment being delivered to those local communities, but this government, this Conservative government, will continue to invest directly into Scotland.
Corinne Smith.
Mr Speaker, question 4.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, funding policies for those studying in Scotland, including nursing students, is a matter for the Scottish Government. The UK Government supports collaboration between our nations to share best practice and provide better healthcare services. We will be open to future discussions with the Scottish Government about this.
For that answer. My constituent has been denied additional funding for her nursing degree because she's domiciled in England but studying in Scotland, whereas those studying in England, regardless of where they're domiciled, can access this funding. So what advice can the Minister give me to help my constituent?
Mr Speaker, nursing bursaries for those wishing to study in Scotland are a matter for the Scottish Government. Unfortunately, the Scottish Government only provides bursary support for Scottish domiciled nursing students, and only if they're enrolled in a course that leads to a diploma in Scotland. In contrast, the UK Government ensures that the Learning Support Fund is available to all UK students studying at English universities, regardless of where they are domiciled. I'd be very happy, on behalf of the Honourable Lady, to set up a meeting with my colleagues in the Department for Health to see how we might be able to pursue this further.
Liz Chapman.
Number 5, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, with your permission, I shall answer questions 5 and 12 together. Mr Speaker, the latest official figures speak for themselves. These show sustained increases in both the import and export of goods between Scotland and the EU, with healthy results for services too.
Liz Chapman.
Well, the Brexit pain continues, with £140 billion wiped off the UK economy, more regulation making it tough for exporters, and relatively to similar-sized countries, Scotland exports are under real pressure. Two themes in their First Minister's industrial strategy were to become an independent nation and to rejoin the EU. All the evidence points that that is the correct course of action, doesn't it?
No, it does not, Mr Speaker. Scotland continues to punch above its weight, both in exports and goods and services and foreign direct investment. Mr Speaker, trade is now well above pre-Brexit levels.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. According to the Government's own figures, new Brexit controls will cost the UK £330 million. Wow. Now, businesses in Glasgow are telling me that they're already suffering from increased costs and red tape when they're importing parts and exporting goods. Can the Minister explain to businesses in my constituency of Glasgow North West how Brexit is good for them?
Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady and the SNP really do have a brass neck speaking about business costs when it comes to their own policy of bringing a hard border at Berwick next to my own constituency. That would risk thousands of jobs and force thousands of companies out of business. it would be the most damaging and reckless economic step. We will work through any short-term issues, but the answer is not the long-term decline as proposed by the SNP.
Tory McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker, the former Right Honourable Member for Kingswood and Government Net Zero star said that what business... Sorry, six. Yeah, sorry.
Mr. Speaker, supporting economic growth in Scotland remains a core priority for the Scotland Office. We are focused on long-term economic growth, generating more jobs and boosting business investment. This is exemplified by investment of up to £372 million in the Scottish Free Port and Investment Zones programme. This is on top of our £1.5 billion worth of investment into growth deals across the whole of Scotland.
Tory McCarthy.
As I was saying, the former Right Honourable Member for Kingswood and Government Net Zero star said that what businesses and investors need from the government is certainty, clarity, consistency and continuity. Never has this been more true than in Scotland, where there is huge potential for businesses and communities to flourish as a result of the green transition. But they're not getting the certainty, clarity, consistency and continuity that they need from this government, are they?
Mr. Speaker, I don't accept that analysis. The UK has a world-leading ambition to deploy up to 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, for example, with up to 5 gigawatts coming from floating offshore wind. Offshore wind provides secure, domestically generated electricity and will play a key role in decarbonising the UK power system by 2035, achieving net zero by 2050. So I do not share the Honourable Lady's analysis of this government's focus in this area.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister share my frustration that whilst his department's working to support the Scottish economy, the SNP is hitting it with higher taxes and not supporting vital sectors like hospitality and tourism in the way that's happening in England?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Sadly, the SNP's sole focus seems to be independence, referendums and making Scotland the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. I can see this every day of the week in my own constituency as people are finding it increasingly difficult to justify remaining in Scotland when they're paying so much more tax compared to the rest of the UK but getting less good public services.
We now go to Shadow Secretary of State Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by joining the Minister and passing on our condolences to the Secretary of State for the bereavement and his family. Can I also wish everyone a happy Burns Day for tomorrow and thank our wonderful Ayrshire musicians who are in the gallery who treated us to some entertainment last night. Mr. Speaker, since this government has been in power, working people have paid on average 10 pence in the pound more in tax. The supposed party of low tax has created the highest tax burden on working people in 70 years, and it makes this the biggest tax-raising parliament since records began. In Scotland, the SNP has looked at this tax burden and said, hold my beer, as everyone earning more than £28,000 pays even more tax than they do in England. What impact does the Minister think this historically high tax burden has on the Scottish economy?
Mr. Speaker, well, this government remains focused on reducing the tax burden when it is prudent to do so. But as he identifies, in Scotland we have an additional challenge in terms of the high tax agenda being put forward by the Scottish Government, the SNP, and I share his concerns about the impact that is having on the ability of the Scottish economy to perform at its full potential.
Ian Murray.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister seems to think that picking your pocket of £10 and giving you £2 back is something to be grateful for. The fact is that working people all across the country and in Scotland are paying for the Tories crashing the economy. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Barnett formula results in an additional £19 billion of public spending into Scotland's economy. But last week, the national newspaper reported that the SNP was being encouraged by their sister party in Wales to join the campaign to ditch the funding formula. 16 years of SNP government has left Scotland's public finances with a £1 billion black hole. We're in the middle of the worst cost of living crisis in generations, yet historically high taxes are already being imposed on working people to pay for this. Losing the Barnett formula would devastate Scotland's public finances and the economy like nothing we've seen before. Will the Minister join me in demanding that the SNP rule out this policy to bin the Barnett formula?
Mr Speaker, the biggest enemy of the Barnett formula and the biggest enemy of devolution in Scotland is the SNP. They want to rip up the devolution settlement and they want to stop the Barnett formula, which results in millions of pounds of extra investment going into Scotland each year. This government, this party remains absolutely committed to devolution and that Barnett formula and more investment into Scotland.
Gregory Campbell.
Number 7.
Mr Speaker, the United Kingdom Government has taken action to make trade between Scotland and Northern Ireland easier. The UK Government is also committed to providing funding to deliver targeted improvements to the A75 road. This will provide better links between Cairn Ryan ferry terminals serving Northern Ireland and South West Scotland, benefiting businesses on both sides of the North Channel.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the reply the Minister has given us. He will understand, like many do, that the economic powerhouse of the United Kingdom is usually centred in the southeast of England and thus to the detriment of the southwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Will he do more to ensure that that small 12-mile stretch of water between Scotland and Northern Ireland is bridged in business terms by greater cooperation and expansion opportunities for people on either side of that 12-mile stretch?
Mr Speaker, the honourable member makes a very important point. I fully recognise the very strong links that exist between South West Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the potential to enhance those economic ties are great. Improved transport links are undoubtedly part of that with the A75 and ferry links. I look forward to working with him to see how we might be able to enhance and improve those links moving forward.
The Select Committee Speaker, Shaw.
Speaker, Scottish businesses would give their right arm to have the arrangements that Northern Irish businesses have with their access to the single market and all the competitive advantages that brings. The Prime Minister's described Northern Ireland as one of the world's most exciting economic zones. Does he agree with that? And what's he doing to ensure that Scotland gets the same arrangements?
Mr Speaker, well, I thought the honourable member was going to stand up to tell me how great the House of Lords was now, a bit like his honourable friend, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, in a sort of preemptive job application. Mr Speaker, Scotland is not Northern Ireland and does not share the land border with an EU country. It's disappointing that the SNP is seeking to play party politics with the situation in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, as the SNP well knows, has a unique place in the United Kingdom, and we will protect that.
Alan Smith.
Number 8, sir.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government works tirelessly to promote Scottish interests around the world through our extensive diplomatic network, forging business links and generating trade and investments. Our response to the Scottish Affairs Committee's recent inquiry in Scotland's international position highlights the extensive efforts we undertake to achieve this.
Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm afraid I don't share the Minister's Panglossian view of this. Would you share my concern that recently published figures which show that in the years 2019 to 21, Scottish exports to the EU fell from 16.95 billion to 14.97 billion. Whatever the UK Government's doing, it's not working. So the Scottish Government has a pressing need to promote ourselves overseas for our economy and our society. Would the Minister not agree that now's the time to increase that overseas promotion, not cut it back on domestic wrangles?
Mr Speaker, given the member's interest in this area, perhaps he could speak with his SNP colleagues in the Scottish Parliament. They are cutting funding to South of Scotland Enterprise, which will mean less support for businesses in the south of Scotland to grow, innovate and export. Perhaps he could tell the First Minister of Scotland that promoting Scotland overseas begins with supporting businesses at home in Scotland.
Jamie Stone.
Number 9, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, the UK Government recognises the important job that all NHS workers do, including those in the ambulance service. I see this every day of the week in my own constituency in the Scottish Borders. The UK Government would be open to exploring with the Scottish Government how we can work together and share best practice to reduce ambulance waiting times in all parts of the United Kingdom.
Jamie Stone.
Mr Speaker, last year in Scotland, almost 3,000 people had to wait more than 8 hours for an ambulance. But in recent days, women who might have to travel
a 2.5-hour drive to Rigmore Hospital in Inverness to give birth or for specialised treatment, they haven't been able to travel at all because the roads have been closed owing to the terrible weather we've had. Does the Minister share my deep anxiety for any woman who lives over 100 miles away from Rigmore Hospital?
Mr. Speaker, I share the honourable member's concerns and agree that these long distances are not acceptable, but it tells you all you need to know about the NHS in rural Scotland. NHS Highlands have said that it will need to substantially reduce spend following the SNP government's budget in December. The SNP government is taking a slash-and-burn approach to the rural NHS across Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Pretend, sir.
Mr. Speaker, the autumn statement supported families and set measures to grow the Scottish economy. With a stronger fiscal outlook, the Government has the space to cut taxes for hard-working people and businesses. This is highlighted by cuts to national insurance benefiting 2.4 million people in Scotland, and the extension of full expensing, ensuring the UK has one of the most competitive business tax regimes in the world.
Order, order. Please, don't walk in front of members like that. Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is correct that the autumn statement from this UK Conservative government provided tax cuts for millions of Scots, provided support for businesses and invested to grow the economy. That was in stark contrast from the SNP's budget last month, which hiked taxes on hard-working Scots, failed to pass on the support to hospitality, retailing and tourism sectors, and has been widely criticised across Scotland. So does the Minister agree, as I do, with Sir Tom Hunter, who said at the weekend that the business community in Scotland doesn't believe the SNP has their back, and that must change?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I agree with my honourable friend, and Sir Tom is right too. Traders in Scotland have accused the SNP government of undermining the rejuvenation of high streets across Scotland with their tax hikes of 6.7% through business rates. The SNP must stop attacking employers and high street traders who are already under tremendous financial strain because of the SNP's mismanagement of Scotland's economy.
Despite devolution rendering it pointless, the budget of the Scotland Office, along with that of the Attorney-General, has jumped by over £3 million since 2018-19, leaping up by £1.2 million just last year, while the Scottish Government's budget allocation suffered a real terms cut. Around 80 people currently work in Queen Elizabeth House alone for the Scotland Office, along with around 30 deluxe civil servants. What on earth are they doing, and how does he justify that to the Scottish taxpayer?
Mr. Speaker, the team at the Scotland Office, both in Dover House and in Queen Elizabeth House in Edinburgh, are doing a tremendous job supporting Scotland across the United Kingdom and around the world. I'd be very happy to welcome the Honourable Lady to join me to meet some of them so you can understand more clearly the important work that they do on our behalf across the UK.
That completes Scottish questions. We now come to the Prime Minister, but I just want to announce to the House we are joined today by the President of the Chamber of Deputies of Parliament of the Czech Republic. Welcome. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Richard Thompson.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know that members from across the House will want to join me in offering our best wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House this afternoon, I shall be meeting the extraordinary 100-year-old Holocaust survivor, Lily Ebbett. Lily promised that if she survived Auschwitz, she would tell the world the truth of what happened. Never has such a promise been so profoundly fulfilled. And as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day on Saturday, I'm sure the whole House will join me in reaffirming our promise to Lily that we will never forget the Holocaust and we will carry forward her life's work for generations to come.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I echo the Prime Minister's comments on World Holocaust Day? My constituents, like all of our constituents, rely on the Royal Mail to deliver important items of mail and packages and for people to run their businesses. So they'll be very alarmed to learn of proposals from Ofcom that Royal Mail might be allowed to cut the number of days
that they might be able to, that they will provide that service. Can the Prime Minister give a commitment to me here today that under his watch there will be no reduction in postal services provided by the Royal Mail in Scotland or anywhere else?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree about the importance of the Royal Mail's universal service obligation, and as you will have heard from the Minister this morning, we remain absolutely committed to ensuring that it remains as it is.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Lib Dem-run council in Eastleigh has just received a report from their external auditors warning of the possibility of fraud and ignoring whistleblowers who try to warn them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Lib Dem leaders who shun accountability, shun transparency and simply say "not me, Gov" should start showing some remorse and responsibility or make way for those who will?
Well,
We'll hear the answer. Come on, Prime.
My honourable friend raises an important matter to the people of Eastleigh, which I was pleased to discuss with him on my recent visit to his area, and I know that the contents of the report are deeply concerning. It is disappointing to see this Liberal Democrat-run council rack up debt with absolutely no plan for how to fund it. And the council has been issued with a best value notice, and I know that he is talking to the Department of Levelling Up, who will be monitoring the situation closely.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales, and in his comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? Never again must be said more defiantly this year, as it's said every year. Mr. Speaker, last week we lost Sir Tony Lloyd, a true public servant who touched the lives of many people across the House and across the country. And I'm glad that his family were here yesterday to hear the many tributes to and memories of Tony. He will be greatly missed. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's had quite a week, from endlessly fighting with his own MPs to collapsing in laughter when he was asked by a member of the public about NHS waiting lists. So I was glad to hear that he managed to take some time off.
Can I just say, I wanted to the Prime Minister, I'm certainly going to hear the Leader of the Opposition. Those people who don't want to hear, they can certainly leave, because that's who it's going to be, so get it in order. Some of you are wanting to catch my eye again. It's not a good way to do it.
Mr. Speaker, I love this quaint tradition where the more they slag him off behind his back, the louder they cheer in here. Keep it going.
And also, for this side, you can have a joint cup of tea. Come on.
Mr. Speaker, I was glad to see that he managed to get some time off yesterday afternoon to kick back, relax and accidentally record a candid video for Nigel Farage. The only thing missing from that punishing schedule is any sort of governing or leadership. So was he surprised to see one of his own MPs say that he doesn't get what Britain needs and he's not listening to what people want?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about what Britain needs, what Britain wants, what Britain values. This from a man who takes the knee, Mr. Speaker, who wanted to abolish the monarchy, who still doesn't know what a woman is, and who just this week, one of his front benchers said that they back teaching divisive white privilege in our schools, Mr. Speaker. Looking at his record, it's crystal clear which one of us doesn't get Britain's values.
Mr. Speaker, he spouts so much nonsense, no wonder they're giving up on him. And even now, as his government crumbles around him and his own MPs point out he's out of touch, got no plan for growth, crime or building houses, the Prime Minister is sticking to his one-man Pollyanna show. Everything's fine. People should be grateful to him. The trouble is, no one's buying it. Does he actually understand why his own MPs say he doesn't understand Britain and that he is an obstacle to recovery?
Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, he calls it nonsense, but these are his positions, Mr. Speaker. Right? And he doesn't want to talk about it, but this is the fact. He chose to represent a now proscribed terrorist group, Mr. Speaker. He chose to campaign against the deportation of foreign national offenders, Mr. Speaker. just like he chose to serve the Right Honourable Member for Islington North, Mr. Speaker. That's his record, those are his values, and that is exactly how he should be judged.
Mr. Speaker, in 2008, I was the Director of Public Prosecution, putting terrorists and murderers in jail. He was making millions betting on the misery of working people during the financial crisis. And we've seen this story time and time again with this lot. Party first, country second, safely ensconced in Westminster, they get down to the real business of fighting each other to death. The country forced to endure their division and chaos, the longest episode of EastEnders ever put to film. Meanwhile, this week we discover that Britain is going to be the only major economy that no longer makes its own steel. That the government is handing out £500 million to make 3,000 steelworkers redundant, and that the parents of thousands are being told that his free childcare promise is nothing but a mirage. Isn't he embarrassed that the Tory party is yet again entirely focused on itself?
Mr. Speaker, there's yet more sniping from the sidelines. Yeah, you can see exactly why Hizbut Tahrir hired him in the first place. But he wants to talk about these things. Even his own party are now realising that he simply doesn't have a plan for this country, Mr. Speaker. The member for Dagenham and Rain has said it's difficult to identify the purpose of his leadership. And long-time celebrity backer Steve Coogan recently said he licks his finger, sticks it in the air, and just sees which way the wind is blowing. Even Labour Party know, Mr. Speaker, he's not a leader, he is a human weather vane.
It's not the sidelines, it's behind him that the fire's coming in, Mr. Speaker. And he can try and blame the Labour Party all he wants. The difference is, I've changed my party, he's bullied by his party. And has he found the time in his busy schedule to work out why thousands of parents are being told by their nurseries that they won't get free childcare that he promised them?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's see what his party is offering the country. Right, so we all know, Mr. Speaker, he doesn't have many ideas for our country.
I'm going to hear the Prime Minister.
Well, he doesn't have many, but one thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is that...
You don't want to push it, do you? No.
We do know that he's committed to his 2030 decarbonisation promise, Mr. Speaker, which they say will cost £28 billion. But I was reading about it this week. He says he's changed the party. One of his team called it an albatross hanging around their neck. That might have been the Shadow Chancellor, maybe, Mr. Speaker. But he said they're doubling down on it. All this ahead of a crunch meeting, we're told this week, for them to work out how they're going to pay for it. I can save them some time because we all know the answer. Higher taxes for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, there's only one party that crashed the economy. They're sitting right there, right
there. Oh, Mr. Holmes, you've had your question already. Obviously, you don't want to remain for the rest of it. Keir Starmer.
He has Mr. 25 tax rises, and he's got nothing to say on childcare. Millions of families will have been listening for an answer, and they got absolutely nothing. He announced that scheme a year ago, claiming it would get 60,000 parents back into work. Only on Monday of this week did he notice there was some, in his words, practical issues with that. 8 weeks before its launch, parents can't budget, plan for work or make arrangements with their employers. And the Prime Minister's response is to say it's all fine, it's the fault of the Labour Party. Is this merely a practical issue, or is it yet another example of him simply not understanding how life works for other people?
Mr. Speaker, we're delivering the biggest ever expansion of childcare in this country's history, Mr. Speaker. But while millions of parents will benefit from that, again, it's right that he should come clean with them about the cost that his plans will impose on all of them. He goes on and on about the Green Promise, Mr. Speaker. He says he wants to keep it. But he doesn't have a plan to pay for it. What he's really saying is he'll scrap the borrowing associated, but he wants to keep the £28 billion of spending. So, for all those working families who are benefiting from our free childcare, he should come clean with them now. Why doesn't he come clean with them now? Come clean with them now and just be clear, his plans mean back to square one and higher taxes for British people.
Mr. Speaker, making steelworkers redundant and failing to provide childcare is not a plan, Prime Minister. It's a farce. It's a farce. And he may soon discover that with childcare, there's an IT problem. Nurseries haven't got the spaces. They haven't got the staff. There's a black hole in their budget, and it's 8 weeks to go. That isn't a plan. And families across the country, well, they can laugh all they like. Families are making plans now. They laugh at it, of course they do. Families are struggling with a cost of living crisis, trying to work out the household budget, balancing spiralling mortgages, prices and eye-watering bills. And then at the last minute, they're thrown into chaos because their nursery says they can't deliver the free childcare he promised. Now, he calls that a practical issue. But I preferred the honesty of whichever of his colleagues briefed to the Times that it was, and I quote, a complete shit show. Who was it who briefed that to the Times? Hands up. Will the Prime Minister finally realise...
I'll decide how long the question goes. Those who wish don't hear it, I've told you the answer, and I'll help you on the way. Keir Starmer.
When will the Prime Minister finally realise that the biggest practical issue facing Britain is the constant farcical incompetence of the government that he leads?
Mr. Speaker, another week with no ideas, absolutely no ideas as country, and absolutely no plan. He talked about the cost of living, Mr. Speaker, he talked about the economy, but he never actually brings it up, and we all know why, Mr. Speaker, because things are improving and we are making progress. Wages now rising, Mr. Speaker, debt on track to be reduced, and inflation more than halved from 11% to 4%, because he actually knows that our plan is working and that his £28 billion tax grab will take Britain back to square one. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the choice. It's back to square one and higher taxes with him, or a plan that's delivering a brighter future with the Conservatives.
Changing gear, Mr. Speaker. Too many oligarchs and kleptocrats are living off ill-gotten gains beyond the reach of domestic courts here or in countries like America. Ever since the 2016 London Anti-Corruption Summit, moves to create an international anti-corruption court have been gathering momentum to plug this gap. It already has support from countries like Canada, Holland and Nigeria, and would fund itself from the fines it charged. Will this government take the lead in getting it underway, ending impunity for these crooks once and for all?
Well, can I firstly pay tribute to my honourable friend for his work on this issue? As I'm sure he'll appreciate, establishing a new bespoke institution is a significant endeavour, but I know he's discussed it with the Foreign Secretary, who will look at the proposals in more detail. And in the meantime, as he knows, our Economic Crime Act has a raft of new measures to crack down on dirty money, and we will shortly be publishing our second anti-corruption strategy. We'll set out ambitious plans for combating corruption, both here at home, but also internationally.
SNP leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, last night, as Tory MPs were once again fighting amongst themselves, the public were sat at home watching John Irvine of ITV News report on footage from Gaza of an unarmed Palestinian man walking under a white flag, being shot and killed by the IDF. Prime Minister, such an act constitutes a war crime, does it not?
Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely consistent that international humanitarian law should be respected and civilians should be protected. I've made that point expressly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Foreign Secretary is in the region this week making exactly the same point.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to rise to that dispatch box and tell the people of these Isles and elsewhere that shooting an unarmed man walking under a white flag is a war crime. Now, in recent weeks, this House has acted with urgency and intent following an ITV drama. The question is, will this House now show the same urgency and intent following this ITV news report? And finally, back a ceasefire in Gaza.
Mr. Speaker, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary, and we do want to see an immediate and sustained humanitarian pause to get more aid in and, crucially, the hostages out, helping create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. I set out the conditions for that earlier in the House. The Foreign Secretary is in the region today and will continue to press all our allies and partners to make sure that we can bring about that outcome.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, access to NHS dentistry is a key issue in Ipswich and Suffolk. Locally, actually, we've done something about it. And the University of Suffolk and the local NHS deserve great credit for establishing a new dental centre which is going to carry 18,000 hours a year of NHS dental appointments. However, a source of great frustration for myself and a number of constituents is that many people who train to be a dentist at university for 5 years and have their training heavily subsidised can immediately go private or actually go abroad without giving anything back to the NHS. It seems wrong to me. Would the Prime Minister support the view of many of my constituents that for say 5 years they work in the NHS, they give something back, and this will make a huge contribution to this problem?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for better dental access in his constituency, and I congratulate him on the new dental centre that's opening, which I know he worked very hard to deliver. And I agree with him. It's right and fair that we seek better value for the significant investment that the taxpayer makes in the education and training of the dental workforce. That's why, as our workforce plan outlined, we are exploring whether a tie-in would ensure that dentists spend a better proportion of their time in the NHS, and we'll be launching a consultation on this policy later this year.
Colm Eastwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the week of the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, people in Derry are watching unarmed Palestinians being gunned down by Israeli soldiers. Over 25,000 people have now been slaughtered in Gaza. The Prime Minister says, and he said it again today, that he wants to see a sustained ceasefire. So my question is a very, very simple one. The next time there's a vote at the UN for a ceasefire, will his representative vote for it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we'll engage with all UN resolutions on their merits, and I've been clear no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than is necessary. We do want to see an immediate pause so we can get aid in and hostages out, because the situation is desperate for many people there. But a sustainable, permanent ceasefire needs to fulfill a set of conditions, including Hamas releasing all of the hostages, Hamas no longer being in charge of Gaza with the threat of rocket attacks into Israel, and an agreement in place for the Palestinian Authority to return to Gaza to provide governance and services. The Foreign Secretary is in the region. Those are the principles on which we are working, and I believe those are shared by all our major allies.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker. In 1859, Brunel opened his rail bridge over the River Tamar. In 2022, I met with Network Rail and others to celebrate the agreement to build a simple footbridge going over the railway line in Lostwithiel. That bridge still doesn't exist, and I have no completion date. Can my right honourable friend help?
Well, I know that my honourable friend is a long-standing campaigner for the footbridge at Lostwithiel station, and I recognise her concerns and the pressing need for the construction of this footbridge. I'm told that Network Rail is currently working on a funding solution for this, so that it can take forward this important project in the next financial year, and the Rail Minister will keep my honourable friend updated on his progress.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A report released yesterday by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation found that 1 in 4 people in the North East are living in poverty, with the child poverty rate for every local authority in the region higher than the UK average. Too many of our people are being hard hit. Now, the Prime Minister says that his plan is beginning to work. So can I ask the Prime Minister, where does rising child poverty fit in his plan?
Well, in fact, Mr. Speaker, the plan is working because poverty is falling in our country. Since 2010, there are 1.7 million fewer people in poverty, including hundreds of thousands of children. Of course, there's more to do. There's always more to do to make sure children don't grow up in poverty, but that absolutely wouldn't be helped by Labour's £28 billion tax grab on their parents, which would take money out of their family's bank accounts.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, Bracknell Forest is a place of aspiration, opportunity and enterprise. Business occupancy rates and employment figures are thankfully high. Footfall at the Lexicon shopping centre is up and wages are up, but the cost of living continues to bite across the UK. What more can be done to put more money in people's pockets?
Well, it's great to see, thanks to my honourable friend, that Bracknell Forest is thriving with people in work up, footfall in the town centre up, and as he knows, almost 100% of his schools now good or outstanding. But he's right that we must do more to relieve the burden on working people, Mr. Speaker, which is why we cut taxes for tens of millions of people in work earlier this year, worth on average £450. And we've got to stick to the plan for lower taxes, a strong economy, and a brighter future for the people of Bracknell Forest, and absolutely not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party.
Debbie Abrahams.
Mr. Speaker, if everyone had the same good health as the least deprived 10% of the population, in England there would have been a million fewer deaths between 2012 and 2019, and 28,000 fewer deaths in the first year of COVID. These inequalities are not inevitable. Does the Prime Minister think that cuts in social security to 85,000 low-income households, including people in low-paid work in my constituency, will help or to address these health inequalities?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Lady that we are committed to caring for society's most vulnerable, and that's why almost 20 million families will see their benefit payments increase this April, which will bring our total support over these few years to around £3,700 per UK household. The Department for Work and Pensions is looking very closely at how it can target its services precisely on the most vulnerable customers, and I know the Honourable Lady spoke to the DWP Permanent Secretary at length about this when he appeared before this Select Committee earlier this month, and I can assure her that he will be writing to the committee on exactly this subject shortly.
Jonathan Lord.
The post office scandal has affected so many people, including my constituent, Seema Misra, a sub-postmaster from West Byfleet with an outstanding record of service to her community, who was wrongfully convicted in 2010 of stealing £75,000 and was sentenced to prison on her first son's birthday and whilst pregnant with her second son. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and more importantly with Seema Misra herself, who is in the gallery today with her husband Devinder, that she is due a full apology from the Post Office, a full apology from Fujitsu, and proper compensation as a matter of urgency?
And I know my honourable friend has been a great support to his constituents over all the years and has fought relentlessly for the truth to come out. As I've said, the Horizon scandal is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. We will introduce, as I said a few weeks ago, primary legislation within weeks to ensure that all convictions that were based on erroneous Horizon evidence are quashed, that will clear people's names, deliver justice and ensure swifter access to compensation. Innocent people, like my honourable friend's constituents, have waited far too long, and I'm determined that they receive compensation as swiftly as possible. We have a clear moral duty to right these wrongs, and that is exactly what we will do.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2021, 3,527 food parcels were given out by Bulwell and Bestwood Food Bank. Last year, that number exploded to 6,500, with nearly half going to children. The food bank's now having to buy food to supplement donations, which can only be sustained for a short period. Rather than pretending that things are getting better, will the Prime Minister apologise for the daily chaos in government, which is leaving widespread destitution unaddressed?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to see anyone reliant on food banks. But while they're in place, I have nothing but praise and thanks for the people who run them. But it is wrong to say that we aren't making progress. When I came into this job, inflation was running at 11%. That is the single biggest impact on families' cost of living. And now, thanks to the efforts of this government, most of them opposed by his party, inflation has now been more than halved at 4%. And we're combining that with significant tax cuts to put more money in people's bank accounts at the end of every month. That's the right way to go about supporting people, combined with our extensive cost of living support for the most vulnerable. And all the statistics show that that support has helped, has made a difference, and that's what you get with responsible management of the British economy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In November, I held an adjournment debate on the South Fylde line and the need for a passing loop to double its hourly service and increase resilience against delays and cancellations, which again caused misery for travellers over Christmas. The assurances I received from the Rail Minister built on the positivity generated by the reallocation of HS2 funds. Since then, progress has been desperately slow, and my efforts to advance this critical piece of infrastructure for the people of Fylde has been frustrated. Will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the government can help to get the South Fylde line back on track?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is correct that local transport projects are and must be prioritised, and every region of our country will have more transport investment as a result of the decision that we made on HS2. Now, work is underway to consider potential upgrades to the West Coast Main Line, including improvements at Preston Station, which may support additional local services from South Fylde. I know the Rail Minister is carefully considering these options as we speak, and will update my honourable friend in due course.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thames Water are a shambles. In the recent flooding in Oxfordshire, they were dumping sewage from 270 sites along the Thames in 1 week. There was waste backing up into people's homes because of drains that they had not unblocked, and they couldn't even refill their own reservoir because the rivers were too dirty. But rather than offer a rebate for this shoddy service, they are intending to put bills up for everyone by 60%. So will the Prime Minister explain to my constituents why they are being asked to foot the bill for Thames Water's gross incompetence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we've been clear that the volume of sewage discharged by water companies is unacceptable, and that's why we've launched the most ambitious storm overflow discharge reduction plan. And we have now achieved monitoring of almost every single storm overflow in England under this and previous governments, and have introduced unlimited penalties on water companies. And where there is evidence of poor performance, the Environment Agency will not hesitate to pursue water companies concerned, just as they did, I believe, a couple of years ago in the Honourable Lady's constituency, where they fined Thames Water specifically £4 million following a serious incident.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Honourable Member for Knowsley and I published our report on TIDE, type 1 diabetes and disordered eating, a condition estimated to affect over a quarter of type 1 diabetics in the UK. It is life-shortening, life-threatening, and can lead to death. I'm pleased to say that Hampshire Integrated Care Board have already responded positively to the report. Will my right honourable friend ensure that the government not only looks seriously at the recommendations we have put forward, but acts on those recommendations, which would improve lives, and save money for the NHS?
Can I start by thanking my right honourable friend and indeed the right honourable member for Knowsley for their important work on this issue. Of course, I know both of them speak from personal experience, and as she says, it is important that people get the treatment they need. The Health Secretary will, of course, consider the report, and the NHS has already been piloting services to support those with this condition, as she's aware of, and I understand that the NHS is also now expanding pilot sites to every region of the country so that even more people can benefit from the appropriate integrated care.
Adam Kaiser.
Mr. Speaker, we entered 2024 with starvation and famine as acute as ever across the globe, much of it caused by the climate crisis. Yet at present, the world's worst hunger crisis is in Gaza, created by Israel's ongoing siege. The Integrated Food Security Phase classification has found that of 600,000 people facing starvation globally, 95% of them are in Gaza. Mr. Speaker, starvation used as a weapon of war is a war crime. The Israeli government has the power to end the starvation crisis by ending the siege of Gaza and opening all crossings. Does it not, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I've been absolutely clear that we are incredibly concerned about the devastating impact of the situation in Gaza on citizens. That's why we have tripled our humanitarian aid for this financial year to the region, and, as I said in the statement yesterday, are working with partners such as Jordan and the United States to open up new aid corridors so we can increase the supply of aid getting in to those who desperately need it.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the press reported the tragic case of a 14-year-old girl who took her own life following horrific social media bullying, including on TikTok and Snapchat. Since 2010, across the English-speaking world, there's been a marked increase in poor teen mental health, teen suicide attempts, and children addicted to pornography. The United Kingdom has a strong tradition of legislating to protect children from serious threats to their safety and welfare. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's time to consider banning social media and perhaps even smartphones for under 16s?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the impact of what happens online on our children, and that's why our Online Safety Act tackles both criminal activity online and protects children from harmful or inappropriate content such as bullying or the promotion of self-harm, accessing pornography, and also exposure to eating disorders. Ofcom are now rightly developing and consulting on the guidance and the codes of practices for how those platforms will meet their duties, and if they don't clean up their act, then Ofcom will be able to impose fines of up to 10% of global turnover on the social media firms.
Mr. Speaker, recently released documents reveal that the Foreign Office had serious concerns about Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law and its ongoing assault on Gaza. This assessment was hidden from Parliament, whilst the Prime Minister boldly stated his confidence in Israel's respect for international law. Since then, the scale of Israel's war crimes in Gaza have been revealed to the world thanks to South Africa's case to the ICJ. Therefore, is it now not the time for the Prime Minister to admit that he has the blood of thousands of innocent people on his hands, and for him to commit to demanding an immediate ceasefire and an ending of UK's arms trade with Israel?
Mr. Speaker, that's the face of the changed Labour Party.
Educational Trust exhibition in Portcullis House and for your personal unwavering commitment to Holocaust remembrance. Mr. Speaker, as we approach Holocaust Memorial Day, will the Prime Minister join me in commending the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust, in particular their work with Holocaust survivors, who, despite living through the darkest moment in human history, continue to share their testimony in the hope of ensuring never again. In the face of the appalling rise in anti-Semitism which we see on the streets of Britain, will my right honourable friend join me in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment and stand up against anti-Semitism?
Mr. Speaker, I join my honourable friend in paying tribute to the brilliant work of the Holocaust Educational Trust and thank her for all her work on this issue. I'll be signing the Book of Commitment this afternoon during my meeting with Lily Ebbett, and I encourage members on all sides to do the same and to reaffirm with shared determination to ensure that the Holocaust is never forgotten and to defeat the resurgence of anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred in our country.
Final question, Sarah Champion.
Mr. Speaker, I represent a proud steel community in Rotherham who stand with the steel workers in Port Talbot at this very worrying time. My constituents don't want to see their taxpayers' money used to make British workers redundant, our primary steel-making capacity decimated, and our national security compromised. So will the Prime Minister change his destructive course, starting by looking at the credible multi-union plan to safeguard our steel industry's long-term future?
Mr. Speaker, I know this is an anxious time for steel workers in South Wales, but we are committed to working with the steel sector to secure a positive and sustainable future. The Honourable Lady will know that during the pandemic we provided support to Celsa, a steel company in South Wales, to safeguard jobs and ensure the sustainability of that plant. And what was proposed to happen in South Wales was the loss of 8,000 direct jobs, thousands more across the supply chain, and the complete closure of the plant. Because of the government's investment and support and partnership with Tata, we have safeguarded 5,000 direct jobs, thousands more in the supply chain, and ensured the long-term sustainability of that steel plant so it has a brighter future. Obviously, this is difficult, but it's entirely churlish of her not to recognise the largest support package. It is one of the largest support packages that any government has provided any company, and in the process safeguarded thousands of jobs.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Please let the chamber clear.
Quietly, please.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. To ask the Minister if he'll make a statement on resilience in light of recent extreme weather events, including Storm Isha and Storm Jocelyn.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. First, I would like to say how sorry the government was to hear that 4 people sadly lost their life due to Storm Isha, 2 in this country and 2 in Ireland. And I'd like to extend my sympathy to their family and friends. And at the same time, praise our emergency and utility workers who have worked so hard in some very difficult conditions in order to help the public. Forecasters at the Met Office raised a rare whole-country weather warning for the wind over the weekend in preparation for Storm Isha. The warning encompassed even rarer amber and red warnings for wind in the areas forecast to experience the worst of the storm. Indeed, wind gusts reached a peak of 99 miles per hour in Northumberland and 124 miles an hour across the Cairngorms. Although the storm had the potential to be extremely destructive, the vast majority of the transport and power infrastructure stood up well and recovered quickly. And that's a credit to the resilience of our critical infrastructure and the response capabilities of our operational partners on the ground. Storm Isha was closely followed by Storm Jocelyn, which reached a peak of 97 miles an hour, which I'm informed was the 10th named storm to impact our country this season. Again, the impacts from Jocelyn in England were less than feared, though operational partners were working around the clock to clear any disruption on our transport and power networks. The forecasting capabilities of our experts in the Met Office and the accuracy and speed at which they can warn and inform the public of incoming severe weather events does, in no doubt, save lives and protect our homes and businesses. My officials and those across government, working hard last week and over the weekend to coordinate the extensive preparation and mitigation measures being taken across the government. The fact that no escalation to a Cobra-level response was required for either storm is testament to our effective response structures at local and national levels. I'm very grateful for the response from colleagues in the devolved administrations and also local resilience forums around the country. Our local authority and agency partners kept public services running and reacted to any local issues that emerged. So we are adapting to weather events not previously experienced in our country, and events such as these come with increasing frequency and severity. The UK is driving forward cross-government action to respond to climate risks and their impacts on our economy and way of life. Our 3rd National Adaptation Programme, published in July last year, sets out an ambitious 5-year programme of work driven by 3 themes: action, information and coordination. We are ensuring a more integrated approach to climate adaptation over the next 5 years through stronger governance, engagement and coordinated policy making. As part of this, we've established the right governance structures not only to monitor progress, but to tackle strategic cross-cutting challenges which will drive the UK's resilience to climate change.
This is all in line with the government's broader strategy as set out in the resilience framework, which committed us to strengthening the links between our understanding of the risks that the UK faces and the action we take to prevent those risks from materialising. We must continue to drive forward these initiatives that help us curb the impacts of climate change and at the same time build systems that help us withstand extreme events as they arise.
Shadow Minister Pat McFadden.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for his response. Recent days have seen the UK battered by two severe storms, first Storm Isha and then Storm Jocelyn. This is the 10th named storm of the winter, and Liz Bentley, the Chief Executive of the Royal Meteorological Society, has said that these storms are some of the worst in the last 10 years. Our constituents around the country have been hit by widespread damage, flooding, power outages, cancellation of flights, ferries and trains. And in the most tragic circumstances, a reported 4 people have lost their lives. I want to pay tribute to the emergency service workers, electrical engineers and other response teams who've been working to help people restore power and get transport moving, often at risk to themselves in very severe conditions. We owe them all a debt of thanks. Now, of course, ministers can't control the weather. Indeed, the ex-ministers on the benches opposite can't even control themselves. But the greater regularity and severity of extreme weather demands a response from government. So let me ask the Minister, in terms of resilience, given the frequency of extreme weather events, why doesn't the government have a standing flood resilience task force as part of the COBRA system with a specific responsibility to build up long-term protection? Local resilience forums have been neglected since the passing of the Civil Contingencies Act under the Labour government. What more can ministers do to revive them and make sure they're properly supported? And last week, the Public Accounts Committee said that the flood protection budget put in place has been underused since it was announced and is now expected to cover 40% fewer properties than was first claimed. This leaves over 200,000 homes vulnerable to flooding. What is the government's plan for them? Jocelyn may be the latest storm, but it won't be the last. And the very least that the public has a right to expect is that the government understands this and is focused on the job and not whatever is the latest episode in the Tory psychodrama that has distracted governance of the country for far too long.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his warm words about our emergency services and utility workers. And on his specific point about flooding, he'll have heard DEFRA, who are responsible for this, comment earlier in the week that flooding resilience in England is priority for DEFRA as part of a whole society approach to resilience outlined in the UK Government Resilience Framework. For example, the government is investing a record £5.2 billion in the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Capital Programme. Since 2021, over £1.5 billion has so far been invested in flood defence projects across England, with over 67,000 properties better protected. Now, of course, response to flooding is just one part of our resilience work that is coordinated by Cabinet Office. And mercifully, in the storms that we've just had, very, very few families were flooded out of their homes, but we're absolutely cognizant of the need to prepare. I mean, he will have seen, I hope, the NAO report published late last year, noting positively that since 2021, government has strengthened the arrangements to manage national risks, that it's taken steps to address extreme weather risks as whole system risks, and I'll return to that point in a moment, and that it's acquired good forecasting data for droughts, heat waves and storms. Now, what we've seen over the past few years is a noticeable improvement in storm preparedness and response. And if we remember Storm Arwen a few years ago, after 3 days, there were still about 40,000 people without power. Now, these storms that we've just had, which are very powerful, about 400,000 people lost power to their homes, but 99% of them had power restored within 24 hours. And that is as a result of the planning and preparedness that this government has put in place. And that's because we've learned the lessons. We now have improved public warnings, we have hardened infrastructure, and crucially, we forward deploy repair experts. So when we see storms forming over the Atlantic, we signal to local partners in utilities, partners in the emergency services, and they go out and get ready on the ground. And that can be everything from clearing storm drains to being ready to repair infrastructure that might be vulnerable. We have better public information. Public is much more connected with the activity of storms. Naming storms may seem like a superficial change, but actually we know that it has improved public awareness of what's going on. We have better travel advice, much clearer, DFT doing great work through our operators. But also, Mr. Chair, we have superior forecasting. The government has invested a great deal in compute capacity and forecasting capacity that enables us to see where storms are coming. So this better coordination and better deployment of resources from the centre is meaning that we are working better with partners on the ground and getting better response when these extreme events take place.
John. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and take this opportunity to thank his officials in the Cabinet Office that do so much that is often unseen. But for those perhaps have a little bit more of a public profile, would he join me in thanking the Environment Agency, emergency response teams for the West Midlands, the Shropshire Fire and Rescue teams that have done such a great job, and indeed Severn Trent Water and all the officials in Shropshire Council and Telford and Wrekin Council. He mentions national infrastructure. Does he agree with me that highways can fall under that? And would he call upon Highways England to do more to ensure that the M54, an important road in Shropshire and connecting Wales and England, has less flooding in the future, and they put more mitigation and investment into doing that?
I absolutely join him in his words of praise for those who've been working in the West Midlands, and I'm sure that my colleagues in DFT have heard what he said about the critical roads in his constituency.
Kirsty Blackburn.
Thank you very much, Chair. I do think it's a little bit cheeky for the government to take entire responsibility for the improvements, given the improvements that I know the SSE have put in place, for example. They have done a huge amount of work and deserve credit for that work, not just the changes to forecasting, for example. I'd like to thank the resilience partnerships that are in place, the emergency services, the energy companies, and also all of those individuals that stepped up to help and assist others in their local communities. It truly was a community effort. And people came together. I do wish the government would take climate change more seriously, given the incredible amount of extreme weather events that we are seeing right now. It is important for the government to both talk the talk and walk the walk when it comes to climate change, and they should be leading from the front in developing, for example, a strategy that will help to ensure that we are resilient in the face of climate adaptation and the changes that are happening, and also to put the funding in place to ensure that that strategy can be delivered. Would they also consider that in terms of some of the changes that are required, the Scottish Government does need funding for resilience? If we do have a situation where there's a massive geographical disparity in some of the weather events that are happening, particularly Arwen, for example, then Barnet may not be the appropriate method in order to fund some of these things, and it might be sensible for the government to consider with the upcoming budget process, ensuring that the resilience funding is spread to the areas which are most likely to be hardest hit, rather than having Scotland just have a percentage share based on our population numbers, a percentage share based on the likelihood of extreme climate events, particularly when it comes to resilience, would be most welcome.
It's a classic question from the SNP, isn't it? It didn't listen to what I previously said, and it asked for more money. And I have to say that the central government's absolutely not taking all of the credit for everything that's happened. Yeah, as she'll have heard me say just now, it's our partnership with people who work in emergency services, local government, utilities companies, and so on that have made these changes possible. On climate change, I'm sure she'll be pleased to discover that that since peak CO2 emission in the mid-70s, the UK government, by its actions, has helped reduce CO2 emissions by more than 50%, more than any other G7 country. So we absolutely take these things seriously, and we will continue to do so.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement and the Government for their clear actions to strengthen our nation's resilience. As these extreme storms again unleash damage right across the UK, will my honourable friend join me in sending our thoughts to the people affected, homes, businesses, farms, and in paying tribute to the Environment Agency staff, emergency services, local authorities, electricity companies and volunteer groups like the Appleby Emergency Response Group in my constituency, who do so much to help people and communities through the trauma and aftermath of storms and severe floods.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that, and very happy to join him in paying tribute to the Appleby Emergency Response Team. And it is so often local community organisations that both have the connections and the awareness and the intel on what's going on the ground that make response possible. So very, very happy to join with him in that, and glad to hear that although his constituency, I know, was hit by the storms hard, they've managed to move on from it quickly.
Gareth Smith.
Speaker. My friend from the front bench from Wolverhampton South East asked the Minister about why the government had neglected local resilience forums and the Civil Contingencies Act legislation, most notably in COVID when that was bypassed. So can I re-ask that question? What now lessons has the government learnt from COVID and these issues in order to give greater sustainability to those local resilience forums that need to protect us?
Well, we obviously learnt a great many lessons from COVID, and there's been, as the Honourable Lady I'm sure will be aware from the documentation that the government's published over the past couple of years, been a great deal of activity to improve our resilience and our response to emergencies. And my colleague, Deputy Prime Minister, gave a statement to that effect in this House in December. The Cabinet Office assigns ownership of acute national risks to lead government departments across risk identification and risk assessment, prevention, resilience, preparation, emergency response and recovery. Though the lead government departments may change between these phases, the impact changes and different competencies are required. But the UK has adopted a bottom-up approach to manage emergencies, as most emergencies affect local areas. We have local responders, such as the police, fire and ambulance services, which manage them without direct involvement from the government. Response to larger scale emergencies is then led by lead government departments, and it's only in the most serious cases that is escalated to Cabinet Office briefing rooms, known as COBRA, which brings in senior ministers from across government. But as the Honourable Lady will have heard me say, it's very much a partnership between centre and locality, and we're starting to see the benefits of that.
Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my honourable friend to congratulate the good people of Repton and the other villages that came together to help with all the flooding that was going on, and particularly having follow-up meetings now to get more flood wardens across South Derbyshire. The flooding in South Derbyshire, I've never seen anything like it. And we need to get the Environment Agency to move on with plans for holding ponds further up the Trent and the Derwent to stop the runoff from the fields that we've had this time round. And anything that my honourable friend can do to help me get those projects actually spades in the ground, I'd be much appreciated.
Thanks, sir. And I very much hear what my honourable friend is saying, and I know that my colleagues in DEFRA will have heard likewise, and she will have heard what I had to say earlier about their position on flooding. In this instance, we, in terms of alerts, normal flood warnings were operated. We didn't use the national alert because it didn't reach the threshold, and our local partners didn't ask us to use it. But from what we can see at this stage, that local system worked well and helped protect people and, where possible, property.
Rustin Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. The consistent floods, the consistent storms that we've had this winter have meant that our communities have felt more consistently battered by flooding and winds than perhaps ever before. And sadly, as he mentioned, this past weekend, lives were lost. There are also tens of thousands of houses and businesses without power. Transport links were halted. My own constituency of Edinburgh, there were no flights out of the airport, there were no trains going anywhere, roads, bridges were closed. Thousands of homes were flooded. And yet, the National Audit Office has warned that the government has not set a long-term target for the level of flood resilience it expects to achieve, and there are no concrete plans beyond 2026. That could mean that any investment is misplaced and isn't actually efficient or protects homes sufficiently. So, does the Minister see that this could be a lack of foresight, and will the government commit to reversing current cuts to flood protection and do more to ensure that investment is effective?
Well, the honourable lady will have heard what I said, reflecting what DEFRA had said earlier in the week about the £5.2 billion worth of investment in flood and coastal erosion risk management through their capital programme, and the fact that since 2021 the government has put £1.5 billion in flood defence projects across England. And to her first point about the level of disruption, we absolutely understand and sympathise with people who who've been put in this situation. And whilst we cannot control the weather, we can by degrees become better prepared for those events, both by the general resilience planning that government has been doing, but also, as I was saying, by having better intelligence on storms that are forming over the Atlantic, and making sure that we have the right people with the right skills poised to act quickly when these storms strike. Yeah. And that, of course, means that we can minimise disruption to the public, even though we cannot eliminate it altogether.
Henry. Mr Deputy Speaker, in my constituency of Broxtowe, some businesses and homes that I have visited have been affected by multiple storms and have received the flood recovery grant. But as it stands, those who have been affected by both Storm Babette and Storm Henk can only claim after one of the floods. So is the government looking at putting further support in place for individuals who have been flooded multiple times by these separate storms?
My honourable friend raises a very important question. We know how awful it can be for families to be flooded out of their homes. The damage to property and effects, and sometimes to items with sentimental value. And it's very important that we have processes and procedures in place to make sure that we can help people out in those circumstances. On his specific point, I will make sure that he gets a response from colleagues in DEFRA.
Jamie Stone.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. During Scottish Questions, I spoke of how Caithness and North Sutherland was completely cut off. All the roads in and out were blocked during the storms. So a pregnant mum couldn't even begin to start on her journey when a contraction started, the 100-mile journey to Raigmore in Inverness to give birth. Now, people speak of the helicopter ambulance. There's one based in Inverness, but if that has to go to an emergency in Loch Harbour on the other side of Scotland, then what does the pregnant mum do? To be quite honest, we're faced with a mum dying, a child dying. So when the Minister meets with the Scottish Government, would he please point out the utter folly of centralising these services in Inverness when we've got a perfectly good workable hospital in Wick which should be upgraded and put into full use?
Yeah.
Well, I'm very happy to communicate that message strongly to the devolved administration. And I've visited Caithness and I've seen its remote beauty. But yes, one can only imagine what it would be like to be a young woman, giving birth and cut off from major services. So I feel that his plea for the upgrade at Wick is very important.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for his statement. 2 weeks ago, Runnymede and Weybridge was flooded as a result of Storm Henk. And when flooding happens locally, my constituents have to navigate a whole host of different organisations with responsibilities, including Surrey Fire and Rescue, Surrey County Council, Runnymede Borough Council, Elmbridge Borough Council, Thames Water, Affinity Water, the Environment Agency, and Surrey Highways. And as part of my campaign to improve flood response and preparedness and protection from flooding, I've been calling for a local flood control centre to be a single coordinated access point for accessible support and advice and for clear and consistent communication. Would he meet with me to discuss it?
I'm glad to hear that my honourable friend has such a worthy campaign to support his constituents. And I'll make sure that his request for a meeting goes to the most appropriate minister who may be able to advise him on how possible it is.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. According to the NAO, the Environment Agency has cut its forecast for the number of additional properties that will be better protected from flooding by 2027 by 40% since plans were first unveiled in 2020. In Feltham and Heston, also, the level of water in our streets in storms unable to drain away is getting noticeably higher and higher. So I have to push the Minister on this. Could he explain how he is confident that his plans are going to be sufficient to keep homes and businesses safe in the future from flood-related damage, and that this is the case across the country, because this is a huge and growing concern?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question, and she'll have heard me say a moment ago that the NAO was pleased that the government was taking steps to address extreme weather as part of a whole system approach, and that whole system approach can have real advantages when floods are coming. For example, to be able to send out emergency workers, appropriately trained emergency workers, to clear storm drains and make sure that anything that might make the floods worse are cleared out of the way. She'll also have heard me say that DEFRA has committed a great deal of money to improving flood defences over the past 3 or 4 years, and that we have tens of thousands of homes better protected as a result. We're absolutely not complacent, and we're always looking at ways in which we can improve that.
Kit Malthouse.
Thank you, sir. Can I welcome the Minister's statement and also the excellent work by the team at the Cabinet Office, who I know work extremely hard on these problems. As he will know, my constituency is home to some of our most precious chalk streams and winterbournes, and I'm sure he's aware that levels in the Bourne Valley and to the west of Andover in villages there are extremely, perilously even, high. This is particularly important because he will understand the ecological importance of these rivers and the risk of dilution, if you like, or overwhelming of the sewage system and leaking into the chalk streams. The Environment Agency and Southern Water are doing great work. There's a huge pumping operation underway to avoid that calamity. However, further significant rainfall may overwhelm the entire system. So when the Minister comes to the post-match analysis, once the weather calms down, will he give consideration to putting special priority on identifying work that is required in those areas that are of particular ecological sensitivity? There has been significant work up and down my constituency over the last 10 years by the Flood Resilience Group, by the Southern Water and the EA, and indeed riparian owners, but more could still be done, and it needs a certain amount of concentration.
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his observations. I know as a former resident of 70 Whitehall, he understands these problems in great depth. And I also know that the chalk streams of Hampshire have no finer defender than his right honourable self. But the point he makes is a serious one about ecological sensitivity. And it's quite right that we pay attention not only to the immediate threats to life or to property, but also to our natural environment, because, as we know, if we don't do that, the damage can be irreparable and long-lasting.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, there was barely a part of Oxford West and Abingdon that wasn't affected by floods recently, but Abingdon remains unprotected. In 2007, we were promised a plan, and that plan was cut because of a lack of resources for the EA. But it's not just the River Thames, it's also the runoff from the new developments coming off the huge numbers of houses that have been built. So what is the Cabinet Office doing to connect DEFRA with the Department for Levelling Up so that the developers who have promised to clear the culverts actually have that enforced by the local authorities?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her question. And as she will have heard me say earlier, the Cabinet Office has a coordinating role which brings together lead government departments and local responders, and so it would be under that guise that different government departments would meet and discuss issues of the sort that she describes.
Alistair Carmichael.
Mr Deputy Speaker, even by the standards of what we are accustomed to in the Northern Isles, the last few days and the week, in fact, have been exceptionally disruptive. So can I associate myself with those who have already expressed their gratitude
to the road staff, the electricity engineers and others who have gone about their job, and also those who are doing it even if it's not part of their job. The response of farmers who just get a bucket on the front of the tractor and get on with the clearing of the snow has been quite phenomenal. But is this not a moment to pause and reflect that some of the changes that are proposed in other parts of government could in fact weaken our resilience? The switch off of the copper wire network for telephones, the idea of increasing the response time for the search and rescue helicopter provided by the Coast Guard from 15 to 60 minutes. These are all things which will leave us in a worse position in the future if they are allowed to happen. Can the Cabinet Office do something to make sure they don't?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I've landed at Tingwall Airport in a storm in the summer, and that was frightening enough for me. And, so one can only imagine what it felt like in the Shetlands over the past week or so. So my sympathies with his constituents. To his point about general resilience, the government, as I say, is trying to take a whole system approach to really understand exactly how we can work with those who are responsible as emergency responders, but also responsible for our national infrastructure. And as I say, I know that we are making progress, but there are obviously always areas in which we can do more work.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Mr Deputy Speaker, as both the Minister and the Shadow Minister pointed out, this is the latest in a series of storms that we faced. And back in October, St Andrews Harbour was significantly damaged as a result of the sea surges following Storm Babette. Now, it's run by a trust that dates from James VI of Scotland's granting of the land to the people of the town. But as a result of the Community Ownership Fund that the government has run, and other funds generally, more and more of our assets are being owned and run by local communities who, when faced with this kind of disaster, have no source of funding in order to be able to access support. So does the government agree that they should be looking at ensuring that there is funding in place? Because for St Andrews Harbour, it's a working harbour, it's facing £3 million of costs, and without those repairs being made, there's the risk to other parts of the town being affected in future.
Well, I've learnt something I did not know about St Andrews Harbour this morning, and I'm very pleased to have learnt it. But yes, I'm sure that colleagues in other government departments, including DLUC, are considering these very issues. But community-owned assets can be a wonderful thing, and it's very important that assets such as local ports are governed by people who really understand the towns and cities in which they're based. So I'm happy to take that forward.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for his responses, positive answers to the questions that were put forward. Farmers tell me in my constituency they can never ever recall floods and rain quite like it, and they tell me it's been of biblical proportions. So I'm very conscious of the fact of that volume of rain. Hearing as I do from a coastal constituency of Strangford, storms hit with a fury possibly not fully grasped. The coastline defences around Strangford Lough and within my constituency have been subjected to a level of onslaught never before seen. Can the Minister confirm the interventions and the discussions with the Department of Storm, ever mindful, Minister, that in the past this place, Westminster, gave substantial help financially to the department at Stormont to address coastal erosion? So with that in mind, what have been the discussions, and what help that's been given in the past can be given the same level of assistance perhaps be offered again? Thank you.
I will ask ministers from other government departments to come back to him on the specifics, but obviously, as my honourable friend will know, we are very keen to see a restoration of Stormont, and I believe that the House will hear more about that very soon.
Deputy Speaker, Somerset is so often battered by extreme flooding, and in response, the River Cam flood warning system is currently being piloted in my constituency. So a stretch near North Cadbury will be fitted out tomorrow with laser depth measuring devices that will send real-time messages and alerts to residents when the water levels start to rise. Will the Minister join me in congratulating Liberal Democrat councillors and Somerset Rivers Authority for this initiative, and agree with me that we need to fund more extreme weather resilience plans for isolated rural communities?
I'm delighted to hear about this initiative in Cadbury. I have very fond memories as a schoolboy of walking around the hill fort there, and I'm well aware of the historic threats that Somerset has faced to flooding, and I'm glad that in recent instances, local government and central government have been able to work together for the benefit of people who live in the area.
That concludes the urgent question. Point of order for Liam Fox.
Mr Deputy Speaker, an organisation in my constituency where I had grounds to intervene on behalf of a previous pub tenant has issued its current tenant with a gagging order and verbally told them not to contact their MP. Mr Deputy Speaker, what can be done to protect my constituents from such bullying and ensure that their constitutional rights are respected?
Well, first, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for giving notice of his point of order. Constituents' ability to communicate with their members of Parliament is constitutionally important. I'm concerned, very concerned, about the matter that he's raised. Constituents must be able to communicate freely with their members of Parliament, and I trust and hope that urgent action will be taken to clarify that this is understood by all parties in this case. If the matter is not resolved satisfactorily, then I trust that the Right Honourable Gentleman will seek advice from the Clerk of the Journals, in the first instance, about how this very important issue might be escalated. Presentation of Bill, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Today.
Order. I advise the House that this is a very narrow bill. If the House agrees the business of the House motion today, then amendments may be tabled before the bill has been read a second time. I understand that the Chairman of Ways and Means has indicated that she will make her provisional selection of amendments soon after 2 p.m. Members who are considering tabling amendments are asked to contact the Public Bill Office as soon as possible. Presentation of Bill, Mary Robinson.
Whistleblowing Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday, the 2nd of February.
Friday, the 2nd of February. Kit Malthouse.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision about speeding offences on roads to which a 20-mile-an-hour limit applies, to make provision about the enforcement of moving traffic offences, to require 24-hour staffing on works on specified public roads, and for connected purposes. As I'm sure you're aware, Mr Deputy Speaker, life as a motorist has changed very significantly over the last 2 decades. Cars have become safer, more efficient, greener and quieter. And yet, despite the fact that the motor car is possibly one of the greatest contributors to human wealth, happiness and freedom, it has become seen by many as the root of all evil. Despite the enormous benefits that cars bring to our constituents, families up and down the land and indeed across the world, for many motorists, the world seems to be filled with councillors and officials dedicated to making their lives more difficult. Driving is becoming a minefield of potential traps and penalties, such that drivers are becoming paranoid and resentful about the entire system. When this happens, order tends to break down, and time, I believe, has come for a rebalancing. In this bill, therefore, Mr Deputy Speaker, I propose 3 modest measures which will achieve a better balance, and I hope see better results generally for motorists and members of our communities across the board. First of all, I propose that anybody caught speeding between 20 miles an hour and 30 miles an hour does not receive penalty points. Rather, they would be required to attend a speed awareness course. and repeat offences would require repeat attendance at speed awareness courses. And I should declare an interest, having been myself at a speed awareness course recently, caught doing 24 miles an hour on the embankment unwittingly, along with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Not at the same time or in the same vehicle, but he was also done for a similar offence. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, the rollout of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits across the country has brought benefits in terms of road safety, but it has left many thousands of drivers disproportionately punished for straying over the limit. That you can receive 3 penalty points for doing 24 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone and for doing 57 miles an hour in a 50-mile-an-hour zone seems unfair to many and is in danger of discrediting the system. In addition to penalty points and a fine, drivers so punished will also face higher insurance premiums at a time when premiums are rising significantly in any event. As it stands, it's possible to lose your driving licence by driving at 24 miles an hour 4 times in 3 years. 2 years ago, it was revealed that as 20 miles an hour rolled out across London, Transport for London was setting a target of 1 million speeding fines a year with the Met Police. This represents a huge increase in prosecutions and the accumulation of points. Analysis of DFT data by claims.co.uk confirms that of those speeding in a 20-mile-an-hour zone, 49% were exceeding the limit by 5 miles an hour or more, only 19% were driving above 30 miles an hour, and these numbers, of course, imply that 51% of those caught speeding were doing less than 25 miles an hour. In evaluations, Mr Deputy Speaker, speed awareness courses have proven to be significantly more effective in preventing reoffending than penalty points and a fine. If our objective is to improve road safety, particularly on residential roads, then it would be more effective to put people through repeated courses, perhaps with increasing intensity and time required. This would be a more proportionate approach and achieve better road safety. Points, of course, would still apply for those who fail to attend courses or indeed who fail their courses, which I understand is a possibility. The second element of the bill, Mr Deputy Speaker, is for non-speeding traffic offences enforced by a local council or body other than the police. A first offence in these circumstances, in my view, at a particular location, should result in a warning letter rather than a fine. A subsequent offence at the same location would attract a fine in the normal manner. Now, over the last few years, we've seen a significant increase in the number of traffic enforcement cameras operated by local authorities. In London alone, over nearly 3.2 million tickets were issued in 22-23, extracting something like £200 million from motorists. The number of councils approved by the government to operate enforcement this way has increased steadily. There are regular reports in the media of the earnings of particular cameras. The most successful in Birmingham pulls in apparently £10,000 a day from drivers straying into a bus lane. A number of councils who have introduced enforcement cameras have started with a grace period, during which erring drivers have been issued with a warning letter for their first offence at a particular location, recognising that a sudden change may not be immediately appreciated by many. In Liverpool, the city of my birth, when cameras were brought in at one particular location, 1,400 drivers were caught out within the first 24 hours. Happily, they all received a warning letter first. This is a good and civilised principle and maintains public support for the enforcement system. It recognises that the vast majority of drivers will have made a genuine error, will learn their lesson and won't make the same mistake again. This very British sense of giving people the benefit of the doubt should continue, and this bill would make it a permanent feature. Anyone who commits a moving traffic offence, caught in the yellow box, stray in a bus lane, turn left when you shouldn't, enforced by a local authority with a camera for the first time at a particular location, would only receive a warning letter. Subsequent offences at the same location would attract a fine in the normal manner. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, the third element of my bill is that it says that any roadworks on an A road should not be left unattended at any time. Now, the government, as we all know as members of Parliament travelling around our constituencies and to and from London, has struggled to control and minimise disruptive roadworks. Anyone who drives in any major city, in fact, will tell you that unannounced roadworks with poor traffic management and inconsiderate positioning is a source of huge delay and aggravation. Even more so when those works are seemingly abandoned and lifeless, sometimes for days. Even in the last few days, Hyde Park Corner, one of the busiest junctions in the capital, has been beset with works and temporary traffic lights with not a soul in sight after 5 p.m. There is at the moment a polite government consultation out at the moment on increasing fines and tinkering a bit with the current system. My right honourable friend, the member for Rayleigh and Wickford, introduced the 10-minute rule bill last year with imaginative and more radical measures to address the same problem. His Can the Cones campaign hit the mark with many. But my proposal, Mr Deputy Speaker, is simpler and would simply require contractors to ensure that no roadworks on any A road can ever be left unattended. Someone must always be on hand to deal with problems, speak to the public, alert authorities of traffic issues and generally manage the site. This obligation would also provide a powerful incentive for the works to be completed swiftly, and the duty could be satisfied by having at least one person always working on the site. A very efficient use of resources, and one which would show the public that contractors are being as diligent as possible and that works are being completed as swiftly as possible. Above all, motorists would know that their safe and smooth passage through the works was being supervised at all times. Mr Deputy Speaker, I hope that these three simple measures would improve all our lives with greater road safety, a greater sense of proportion and civilisation, if you like, in the enforcement of non-speeding traffic offences, and less aggravation for motorists going through abandoned streetworks.
The question is that the right honourable gentleman have leave to bring in his bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Royston Smith, Will Quince, Nicky Aitken, Sir Desmond Swain, Philip Davis, Mark Menzies, Shailesh Vara, Julie Marson, Steve Tuckwell and myself, sir.
Kit Malthouse.
Road Traffic and Street Works Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 19th of April.
Friday the 19th of April. Point of order.
Very briefly, the Right Honourable Gentleman for North Hampshire kindly mentioned that I brought in a similar bill, or at least on the same subject, last year. I'd like to commend him for what he's done. Just wanted to put on the record that the Roads Minister was here to listen. And perhaps if the Right Honourable Gentleman for North Hampshire or I, between us, put in for an adjournment debate to give the Roads Minister an opportunity to reply on this subject, perhaps the Chair might be prepared in due course to look favourably on such a request.
And the right honourable gentleman has been here long enough to know how to apply for a German debate. However, it's just possible that, that he might find favour with Mr. Speaker, as he would probably find favour with me on this subject. Other than that, I don't think it's a matter for the Chair. We now come to the motion relating to the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill. Business of the House. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Amendments of the... amendments, I beg your pardon. Amendments, new clauses, new schedules for Committee of the Whole House may now be tabled by members at the opposition side of the table of the House. I understand that the Chairman of Ways and Means has indicated that she will make provisional selection, as I said earlier, of all those amendments tabled at or soon after 2 p.m. If any amendments are tabled and then selected by the Chairman of Ways and Means, an amendment paper for the Committee of the Whole House will be circulated as soon as possible. Where do we go now? Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Northern Ireland Executive Formation Bill, second reading.
Now.
Minister to move, second reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill now be read a second time. And it is a very short and I'd like to think perfectly formed bill. And I'd like to thank all those who have helped expedite this simple but important piece of legislation to this point. As Secretary for Northern Ireland, my focus has always been on facilitating the return of devolved institutions and upholding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all its strands. This bill is no different and hopefully plays a part in that. The UK government believes in the agreement. It believes in devolution. It believes in localism, and it strongly believes in power sharing. That is why I am today legislating to retrospectively extend the executive formation period to the 8th of February this year, 2024. The people of Northern Ireland deserve and elect locally elected decision makers and want them to address the issues that matter to them. This very short extension provided for by the legislation will create the legal means to allow the Northern Ireland Assembly to sit and get the executive up and running as soon as possible. Importantly, a restored executive will have access to the significant financial package I announced before Christmas, worth over £3.3 billion, to secure and transform Northern Ireland's public services. Ministers will be empowered to immediately begin working to address the needs of local people and unleash Northern Ireland's full and amazing potential. And this bill helps deliver that outcome and support the return of devolved governance to the citizens of Northern Ireland. And, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for now, on that note, I conclude my remarks and I commend the bill to the House.
Question: has the bill been now read a second time? Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Another year and another bill to postpone the Northern Ireland Assembly elections. Mind you, it is worth noting that the last time we did this, something quite significant happened 5 days later when the Windsor Framework negotiations were concluded. So let us live in a state of hope, tempered, as always, by experience. Can I begin by thanking the Secretary of State for introducing the bill in such a timely fashion? We support it. I have met no one who thinks that holding elections now would help resolve the difficulties that Northern Ireland's politics are currently in. But while we may be in agreement about the need for this bill, I don't think we should let this moment pass without acknowledging that the Assembly elected, 20 months ago, has still not yet been able to meet. And in any other democracy, anywhere in the world, that would be a cause of anger, not to say uproar, because the very essence of a democratic election is that the representative body should be able to meet and do its job. And I would just observe that Northern Ireland surely cannot continue to be the only place where this does not happen. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for the discussions that we have had between us. It is a pleasure to do business with him. And as my predecessor, the Honourable Member for Hove, said just under a year ago, and I quote him, "It would of course be better if this legislation was not needed. Northern Ireland is a valued part of the United Kingdom, and restoring the Stormont Assembly and the Executive should be a priority for the government." Well, I know that it is a priority for the Secretary of State because he spent so much time negotiating with the DUP to try and find a way forward. And from the moment I took on this role, I have tried to support him and the government in that objective. And now, with the negotiations, it appears, having effectively concluded, we've come to the moment of decision. And I hope that the DUP will return to government. I think the DUP should return to government. And I say that for a host of reasons, above all because the people of Northern Ireland need to have their government back. The consequences of having no government for almost 2 years this time around, and of course previously for almost 3 years when Sinn Féin walked out of the institutions, are very serious for the people of Northern Ireland. As we know, the Assembly can't even elect a speaker, so it can't meet. Difficult decisions are not being taken. The public finances are in a parlous state. When the flood struck last year and affected so many businesses and homes, there was no government instalment for people to turn to for help. None.
Will my honourable friend give
Of course I will give way.
When I was at home over Christmas, I took my uncle to the
cancer specialist centre at Belfast City Hospital. It was a very humbling experience to see the care and the dedication provided by the staff there in what is a world-leading facility. But the stresses and the strains were very clear: a lack of funding and a lack of direction, because when institutions and systems fail, people suffer. So this really has to be the last time that legislation like this comes before this House. Get it back up and running, or the Secretary of State with the Irish Government should find something else to sort it out.
Well, I agree with my honourable friend that this is the moment to get the institutions back up and running, and I wish the person he referred to all the best with their treatment. The civil servants, of course, are left to make decisions that really ought to be made by elected representatives. And in the case of public sector pay, for example, with some workers not having had a pay rise for almost 3 years, it should hardly bear repetition. No decisions have been taken because there isn't enough money in the budget to do so. Now, that's why there was such a large strike last week, and I see that there's likely to be further industrial action coming towards us. And I think everyone now recognises, including the government, that that is not a sustainable position, and the proof on the government side is that in announcing the financial package, it identified money for public sector pay, although it is not currently being released until such time as the executive is restored. Now, if I may be really frank, I understand why the Secretary of State took that decision initially, but I must say to him that I think in relation to public sector pay, that moment has now passed, and that's why I called on him last week to release that part of the budget package so that the disputes can be settled, workers can get their pay increases, and public services can try to address the many, many challenges they face. I will, of course, give way.
Thank you for giving way, and he's making a very important point, because, of course, many public sector pay awards have been made, nearly 50 over the last year. And the only reason why the current one is not being made is because the Secretary of State is holding teachers, nurses, etc. as pawns in the game which he is playing, and the efforts he's trying to make to force us into a position to make a decision that he wants us to make and we don't wish to make.
Well, the honourable gentleman links the pay question to the stance that he takes in relation to the current difference of view that the DUP has with the Windsor Framework and the Protocol. I would say to him in return, it is equally true that if the DUP were to go back into government, then public sector workers would get their pay increase. And that's why I said a moment ago that I hope very much that that will be the case. Now, turning to the substance, I will, of course.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. Shadow Minister, I'm aware from back home from the papers, from the TV correspondence, from media statements made by those in unions. They say very clearly, and I quote them, that the problem here doesn't lie with the politicians, with respect, it lies with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who has control of the monies. He, in his own right, as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, could settle these claims for those in education, those in health and elsewhere. The monies are there. The unions say, let the Secretary of State do it. Has he heard the same story as I've heard? I've heard it in the news and the media.
Well, I have indeed heard the unions making precisely that point. And I have set out to the House today why I understood initially why the Secretary of State took that approach, but I do think that public sector workers should not continue to be held hostage to the failure thus far, and I hope that it will change very soon to solve this problem, which is why I am calling on the Secretary of State to release the funds now. Now, we need to be honest about how we got to the deadlock that the government's been grappling with, as indeed has the Right Honourable Gentleman for Lagan Valley as leader of his party. One of the many, many consequences of leaving the EU was that a decision had to be taken about what to do about trade across the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, given that everyone agreed that the border had to remain open. There were not many things that everyone agreed on when it came to Brexit, but that was one of them. And everyone agreed that the EU needed to be sure that goods crossing that border complied with the rules of their single market. There was no escaping this. And the government decided that the answer would be the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, before I occupied this role, I was one of many people who argued that the implementation of the protocol would not work as originally intended in Northern Ireland, including for reasons that many in the unionist community had pointed out. And in fairness to Maros Sefcovic, he understood what the problems were and changed the EU's approach. And that is why I genuinely believe that the Windsor Framework represents a significant step forward. It's why we on this side of the chamber voted for it. Now, of course, detailed implementation will need to be worked through. That is another reason why the executive needs to return. But most businesses tell me that the Green Lane is working reasonably well. And as I said last week, the framework is here to stay. And I make no apology for reinforcing the point again today, because it will continue to be implemented by whoever is in government in Westminster. And anyone who thinks otherwise, with respect, has got it wrong, not least because any hope of negotiating future arrangements of benefit to Northern Ireland with the EU will depend on the Windsor Framework being implemented. Because if the UK were once again to renege on an international agreement it has signed, and it's happened before, there would be, for example, no SPS agreement reached or anything else, because trust would once again have been destroyed. Absolutely destroyed. At the same time, of course, unlike the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland continues to enjoy ready access to both the UK and EU markets, which is a huge opportunity for jobs and economic growth in the years ahead. And these are the facts which nothing is going to change. Now, what the government has been doing, we all understand, is negotiating on measures it could take to reinforce Northern Ireland's position in the UK internal market. And the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley has wisely and repeatedly said, and I support him in this, that any agreement has to be acceptable both to unionists and to nationalists. And that has shown great wisdom. In addition, there is a financial offer on the table, which I think provides a basis for going forward. So after months of negotiation between the government and the DUP, now is the moment to decide whether to restore the institutions. Now, on the detail of the bill, and there's not much, I have just one question. In his press statement on the 19th of January, the Secretary of State said, and I quote, "I intend to introduce new legislation which will take a pragmatic, appropriate and limited approach to addressing the executive formation period and support Northern Ireland departments to manage the immediate and evident challenges they face in stabilising public services and finances," end of quote. Now, I take it from those words he was referring actually to another bill that he thinks might be needed if the current negotiations fail. Can he confirm that that is the case? I'm not asking for any further detail, although I hope, we all hope, that such a bill will not prove necessary because the institutions will return. Also, can the Secretary of State assure the House that as and when there is an outcome, indeed either way, he will immediately come to the House and make a statement? Oh yes, of course I will give way.
Honourable friend for giving way. Would he agree with me that he talked in the questions to the Secretary of State about Plan Bs and alternatives, but would he agree with me that any alternative to restoration of the institution is suboptimal and is also not the settled position of this House? All parties have as their primary policy position on Northern Ireland governance the restoration of the institution.
I agree 100% with what the Right Honourable Gentleman has just said, and he anticipates a point I'm just about to come on to make in my concluding remarks. And they are these, that Northern Ireland has come a long way since the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in 1998. It is unrecognisable in so many ways and for the better. And in all of my meetings, all of my visits, I've been so impressed and encouraged by the energy, the enterprise, the industry of those I have met who are working hard to build a new and better future for the people of Northern Ireland. And that really matters when we know that families in Northern Ireland, for example, have the lowest disposable incomes in the United Kingdom. And the longer there is no functional devolved government, the harder it will be for those businesses to seize the opportunities that are available anyway, including because of access to the EU market, because businesses that are thinking of investing don't like uncertainty. They want stability. They want to know there is a government in place. And so the absence of a government undermines the bright future that otherwise faces the people of Northern Ireland. And the basis of power sharing, which was at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement, including devolved government, was essential to the making of progress. And of course, although there have been bumps and difficulties along the way and periods of no government, a generation on from 1998, I simply want to echo the point the Right Honourable Gentleman has already made, that we cannot give up on devolved government. It is what we believe in this House. And it is the responsibility that all of us take on when we stand for elected office. We can't really have a system where any of us chooses to put conditions on the basis of which, if they're not met, we're not going to take part. That is not how a democracy works. As I'm fond of saying, we have to deal with the world as it is as we seek to change it into the world we would wish it to be. And it cannot be, surely, that politicians from all parties and all communities in Northern Ireland are somehow unable to come together to establish the Assembly, form an executive, and get on with the task of governing. I will give way.
I'm very much enjoying the tone and the thrust of his presentation. Of course, he is dancing between a majoritarian and a power-sharing arrangement in his comments, and so they're not quite perhaps as aligned as he might suggest. But my question is this. This is not the first time that Stormont has been suspended. In the past, Sinn Féin refused to come back to the Assembly, as I understand, over concerns about the language. And the UK government has made steps towards that in more recent years. I'm just wondering then, would he support the UK government making measures towards the current impasse over the Northern Ireland Protocol as modified by the Windsor Framework? Is that a position that he could support, alterations to that, which might be helpful to restoring power and alleviating some of the concerns of the unionist parties in Northern Ireland?
I'm grateful for that intervention, and I believe strongly in Northern Ireland's place as part of the internal market of the United Kingdom. And I've made clear repeatedly since I took up this position that I will support any measures that reinforce that, make that clear, but are also consistent with the international commitments the government has signed up to. If I could just pick it up on what he said initially, I'm not arguing at all for a majoritarian position. I'm not. I believe in power sharing. I am as wedded as the Secretary of State is to the letter and the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement. I'm making a point about the responsibility of politicians to participate in that power sharing arrangement. It's the responsibility. And I would make those remarks equally to those who have collapsed the institutions previously and the current cause of the collapse, because in the end it's not in the interests of Northern Ireland not to have a functioning government. If I could clarify that. I will give way and then I will finish.
Well, because he's raising a very important point. The whole point of the agreement and of power sharing is that it is based on consent. So how can the unionist community consent to law-making by the EU in which they do not participate and have no influence?
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman asks a very pertinent question, but it is a consequence, if I may respond, of a course of action that personally I didn't think was a terribly good idea, and he thought it was. And the moment we left the European Union, everybody knew there was going to be a problem that had to be addressed. There were really, to keep that open border, there were only two practical propositions. The first was the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, the former Prime Minister, came up with a scheme to try and keep the whole of the UK within the arrangements of the single market, having announced we were leaving the single market, and that didn't work out. And the second option was to do the same in respect of Northern Ireland. So it is where we are. And the government eventually negotiated the Windsor Framework, which is an important step forward. These things are going to have to be worked through. The question is is whether the operation of the green lane, because that is really what we're talking about. Everybody agrees with the red lane, if goods are coming into Northern Ireland to then head off to the Republic, well, of course they should be checked. And that's what the red lane is for. So what we're debating is the operation of the green lane. Question, does it really make sense for there to be no power-sharing government institutions, no assembly, no executive in Northern Ireland because of a debate and an argument about the operation of the green lane? Well, my view very strongly is that is not sufficient a reason not to have a functioning government. And I would just conclude by saying the people of Northern Ireland have been waiting long enough, and now is the time for everyone to get back to work.
Yeah. Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I just want to say a few remarks in support of my right honourable friend who is moving this bill. I think it's absolutely the right thing to be doing, and I want to pay tribute to the patient work that he has done over the past few months and his officials have done. Officials here in the UK, in the Northern Ireland office, in the Northern Ireland Civil Service, and in the different political parties at Stormont. There's a huge need for this institution of Stormont to be restored, whether it is public sector pay, which has been mentioned already, whether it is health waiting lists, whether it is creaking public services, charities and others relying on public purse, or whether it's the limited offer of childcare in Northern Ireland. This institution needs to be back up and running. There's also divergence happening on medicines and other issues as a result of the fact that Stormont is not sitting. There's a really good deal on offer that the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister have put forward before Christmas. That provides over £3 billion, and it will unlock many of the challenges currently facing Northern Ireland. My right honourable friend for Lagan Valley and his team, I understand, seem to have negotiated also a very good deal with the government on issues around the Windsor framework. And I hope in the coming days and weeks we'll be able to see the results of that work. I'm sure some within his party will still have concerns. This will not be perfect, but much better now, having moved forward and done so much work over the last few months to go back into the executive and to make the further arguments from there. For unionism generally, being in the devolved assembly is the key route to making the case for the union, for the NHS, for the fact that being in the UK defence and security system is better for Northern Ireland, and for making sure that any remaining concerns on the post-Brexit arrangements are dealt with. The Secretary of State has put the 8th of February as the end date for this bill. My understanding is that the government is supporting the final stages of the DUP negotiations. There's no bullying, there's no hard demands, there's just support for the work that my right honourable friend is doing with his party and the discussions he's having, and a real hope that in making the decision to go back into Stormont, if they do, the future for Northern Ireland, the future for young people and generations to come will be best served by this institution getting back up and running with local ministers and making decisions in the best interests of this key part of our country.
Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'll begin, as is becoming sadly customary now, by saying how much a matter of regret it is that we're back here discussing a postponement to elections. Very firmly of the view that Northern Ireland is governed best when it's governed locally, and that for the sake of all the people of Northern Ireland, we wish to see the Assembly return in early course. But having said all of that, we also see no point or utility or prospect of progress being made by holding an election at this point. Now, there were opportunities last year to reflect on 25 years of of devolution being in place in Scotland and Wales and in Northern Ireland. And I remember with great pleasure the special meeting of the British-Irish Parliamentary Assembly in Belfast, where there was meetings across at Stormont itself, but also at Belfast Castle, where those who were charged with having a care for affairs and relationships between our islands and jurisdictions had the opportunity to benefit from the breadth of experience of those who were actually involved in the peace process and in the Good Friday Agreement and in establishing devolution. And to have that kind of transfusion of knowledge and experience, I certainly found as a temporary custodian of a role of somebody who is charged with having a care as being something that was incredibly valuable. And it was also a tremendous opportunity to have the opportunity to reflect on how far all parts of the UK that had been experienced devolution over that quarter century, but particularly Northern Ireland, how far they had advanced and progressed in that time. And it also brought into sharp focus and relief, I feel, how much is missed by having Stormont sitting empty at present. So I would share very much the words of the Shadow Secretary of State when he speaks about hope here, but being tempered by expectation. Now, I always very much enjoy the opportunity to visit Northern Ireland, whether in a private capacity or in my role as the SNP's spokesperson, and to take the opportunity where I can to engage with businesses and community groups and representatives of wider civic society. And I've had much cause to be grateful to elected members in Northern Ireland across varying parties for the opportunities that they've given me to do that and the doors that they've opened and the insights I've been able to gain. And I think that what has come through from many of those visits and what I observe is the sense of frustration at how politics is presently failing in Northern Ireland. And I say politics rather than politicians deliberately, because it is a failure of politics across many strands that has taken us to this point. And we saw that bubble up most obviously in the recent strikes. Now, I highlighted in the budget debates that we had in this place, in the Northern Ireland budget, about the problems that are caused and the potential solutions that are deferred by civil servants having to try and cheese-pair to set budgets within the confines of the ghosts of ministerial decisions past. Now, I remember from my time in local government the frustration that you would get from council officers if you were unable to provide any kind of clear political direction on what it was you actually wanted to happen. And while it was always possible under different circumstances to set balanced budgets, how much better it was to be able to set them in the context of having some clear political leadership about the choices you wish to make with the resources at your disposal. So that is certainly a consideration here. It is impossible to set the kind of strategic budget directions that are needed in Northern Ireland right now, absent a working institution at Stormont. Now, when it comes to public sector pay, the Secretary of State says that using part of the £3.3 billion cash allocation to settle these claims ahead of Stormont being reconstituted would be it's a political decision and therefore not one that he is willing to make. Now, I would just say, as gently as I can, that taking a decision not to act is also taking a political decision in its own way. So the decision not to act is also political. And I would join with other voices in this place that we have heard and that we have in this debate, previous debates, and as I'm sure we will hear later, to urge the Secretary of State to reconsider his stance on that, because public sector workers in Northern Ireland, the brunt of whom the pressures that are being caused are falling on, really do deserve the pay settlements that their counterparts elsewhere in these islands have been able to get. And I will just mention in passing that levelling up funding, it was said that the absence of a functioning Stormont was the reason why the UK government was unwilling to progress with making funding and levelling up. That caused me to have a wry chuckle to myself, given the UK government's disinclination to work with the devolved governments that are up and running in Scotland and Wales. So I think there's a certain amount of cherry picking going on there with the excuses that are being offered. So punishing the people of Northern Ireland to try to bring to bear some additional political leverage on politicians has not been a conspicuous success so far, and nor do I believe it's an appropriate lever to try and continue to use where public sector pay is concerned. Now, as I say, this was a failure of politics, and the fundamental problem that has led us to where we are stems from Brexit and the manner in which successive governments chose to take that forward, lest we forget, against the express wishes of clear majorities both in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. Again, I allowed myself a wry smile that during debates about the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, we were told about the trade border we'd apparently be creating with the rest of the UK, only then 2 years later to see the UK government going hell for leather towards creating a trade border within itself between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, I do remember a backbench business debate about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I very much enjoyed causing some consternation on the opposite side of the chamber by pointing out, maybe a little bit indelicately, that if Scotland were once again independent and in the European Union, would be able to enjoy free trade with Northern Ireland as a way that neither of us can currently enjoy as part of the Union based on the deals that have been put in place. So I'm very, very clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, in closing, where my preferences are for the constitutional future of these islands are in that regard. But short of that, bringing the UK back into the single market and the customs union would make this go away. But accepting that that is not politically realistic given the stance of the current government or the aspiring government, what I would say is that having closer alignment on sanitary and phytosanitary matters especially would be of enormous benefit, not just to people in Northern Ireland, but also right across these islands, and particularly for my own constituents, speaking selfishly for those involved in the agriculture and food trade. Bringing that closer alignment is a much better thing to do, because the closer we're able to come into alignment, the lesser, I believe, these issues become. And that is something that would be manifestly in the interests of all of these islands, whatever constitutional future we all go on to choose in future. Thank you.
Sir Robert Buckland.
Mr Deputy Speaker, it's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman for Gordon. I was listening very carefully to his assertions about Scotland, an independent Scotland being a member of the European Union. I'm not sure that that assumption is actually the right one to make, bearing in mind the view of some other member states of that union, notably Spain, which I think make a reality check to some of the loftier rhetoric of the SNP about their position in Europe and the world should they choose to separate from the rest of the United Kingdom. I make that point because I think it was inevitable that the consequences of Brexit meant that an arrangement with regard to the hard border, or the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, was always going to be a difficult one. I certainly bear the scars on my back, having been involved as a law officer right through that process, and indeed helping to put together the Malthouse Compromise. Anybody remember that? Back in the early part of 2018. I know colleagues from the DUP will remember that time very well indeed. And we tried to work together to get somewhere which would satisfy everybody. Now, as the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Leeds Central said, we have to work in the world as it is, not as the world that we would like it to be. And in these current circumstances, Mr Deputy Speaker, it does seem to me that one way that we can actually find out about aspects of the operation of the Windsor Framework is for the Executive to be able to carry that out. And to see its operation, to see how the Green Lane works. And if there are operational problems, then let's deal with them. Because I'm as anxious as anybody to make sure that businesses and individuals and everybody who wants to trade in Northern Ireland and through Northern Ireland is able to do so in as free and uninhibited a way as possible. I don't want to see Northern Ireland being cast adrift from the rest of our United Kingdom in that way at all. And I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Or giving way, and he makes reference to Northern Ireland being set adrift from the rest of the United Kingdom. Businesses in the United Kingdom are finding it difficult and bureaucratically difficult to trade with Northern Ireland. As a consequence, the divergence of trade is continuing day and daily and is increasing as we go. That's why everyone says, oh, the Republic of Ireland is booming. That's simply because their supply chain has changed as well. They're no longer coming through the UK, they're getting it straight from France. But one point that I want to find out, can you tell me what engagement has the British government had with the EU in relation to changes that we need to be made to the Windsor Framework and to the protocol to work?
The honourable gentleman, obviously my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, will answer about any engagement that the UK government has had with Brussels, and he's right to cast it at that level because it is a matter between that government and the EU, bearing in mind the Republic's membership of the EU and the fact that the EU has that competence to negotiate a treaty. But it is only barely a year since the Windsor Framework was agreed. I think in all reality, again, coming back to the world as it is, I think it would be wrong of us here to blithely assume that somehow that can be reopened here and now. I'm not saying it can never be reopened. Of course, everything can be reopened. Indeed, there will be an opportunity in a few years to look at the whole trade agreement that we reached with the EU and in the review period in 25-26. But the point I'm making, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that unless we see a functioning executive being able to, and as it will have responsibility for the operational aspects of Windsor, to identify the problems, to highlight them, to raise them with the UK government and indeed at an appropriate level, then I don't think we're going to move this process on in the way that I know honourable and right honourable members opposite want to see happen, as do I. I've said it many times that the UK Internal Markets Act that we debated long and hard back in 2020 when I was Lord Chancellor contained some measures in it that have been helpful and are now on the statute book, but there was more that I think in that bill, putting aside the notwithstanding clause, there was more that was intended to be done legislatively to help cement the place of Northern Ireland in our UK internal market. And I think we should do it. And I think we should legislate. And I know the member for my honourable friend, the member for Belfast East, very much agrees with me on this point. We want to see that happen. I want to see that happen. But we're here in January 2024. I note the shortness of the period that the Secretary of State seeks to extend for the purposes of this Act. I think that is sensible and right. I think, tempting as it is to have longer periods, I'm not going to call them blank cheques, but longer periods, I don't think that would be right. And I wish him well, and I wish everybody in the negotiations well in coming to a sensible and pragmatic solution that allows the Government of Northern Ireland to continue. I'm not going to repeat the points made by honourable and right honourable members, Mr Deputy Speaker. I see it in the committee that I chair weekly. We still have that inability to plan ahead, or the institutions of Northern Ireland have that inability to plan ahead in a multi-year way to provide the level of public service that I know they want to do, but which they just cannot, bearing in mind the constraints that we have to operate under. And unlike previous periods of direct rule, this time there would need to be legislative change here on the floor of this House for that to happen. And I think it's been made very clear by the leaderships in both the main parties that that is not the policy of the British government. Now that's the world as it is, I'm afraid, not as the world as necessary some would like it to be. And I certainly do not want to see a situation where there is an imbalance again within our UK constitution that will only lead to more tension being stoked within the communities of Northern Ireland rather than less. And therefore it seems to me that the most, and I will give way in a moment, the most obvious way forward now does have to be the restoration of the executive. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. There's been much use of this phrase, the world as it is, in this debate so far. I think it is actually helpful. We must be pragmatic about it. And I just wonder whether it's the intention of his committee and their work to include looking at Northern Ireland as it is now, for example, levels of inward investment, or how business has responded to that 12 months in which the Windsor Framework has been in place.
I'm very grateful to him. We are in the process of preparing a report on the state of public services in Northern Ireland. We've taken a wealth of evidence, and I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman Member for Strangford and the Honourable Lady Member for Upper Bann, who are active members of the committee. They will have heard the same evidence that we have heard. We are looking into the energy market. and indeed the move to net zero in Northern Ireland, very important issue, bearing in mind hard-pressed bill payers and the particular pressures that they are under, bearing in mind the way in which energy is supplied. And of course we're looking at issues as varied as education right through to paramilitarism. I think it's right when it comes, I will give way in a moment, I think it's right when it comes to Windsor that I think I sound a bit like Chow En-lai in that in some respects it is still too early to say precisely what its effects are, but there's no doubt that as the Honourable Gentleman from South Antrim has said, I'm sure he's going to intervene again, there is already evidence of excessive bureaucracy and problems that are real for businesses on the ground. I'll give way to him again.
Because Northern Ireland sits under EU rules and laws, the carbon tax offset for energy costs is twice what it is in the rest of the United Kingdom, and that's simply because we are having to take on board European law as opposed to what is passed in this House.
And again, the Honourable Gentleman is right to point out some of the facts here about the position that we find ourselves in. But I'm not going to labour the point. I'm afraid the consequences of Brexit are always going to be complex and difficult for Northern Ireland, bearing in mind the particular importance of the border and the clash, if you like, between the irresistible force of the logic of a single market that wishes to police its border very rigidly and the immovable object of the fact that the border has a particular status and a sensitivity that means that to make it excessively hard creates other problems and other issues that we are all very familiar with. That, I'm afraid, is the difficulty that we have to wrestle with, all of us. And I know that this place sometimes risks sounding rather portentous and nannyish in the way it talks about Northern Ireland. We have to be very careful about that. But what I'm saying is that in resisting that approach, it is absolutely logically correct to say that the best way to cure this issue is for the institutions of Stormont to function now. And I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
Would my right honourable friend have a message for the unionist community in Northern Ireland as to why they should put up with EU laws they do not influence and why they should put up with border controls when they're trading within our own country?
My message to them is simply that the message I would give is that we still need a functioning executive to work out and to bring to account in proper scrutiny issues with the framework, so that at a Stormont level it can be absolutely understood, debated in far more detail than the time and the capacity we have in this House, and for that work to be done thoroughly by the institutions of Stormont, so that this place is even better informed, and the government in particular is even better informed about what it needs to do to correct some of the problems that have been thrown up by the anomalous position that Northern Ireland finds itself in. That is, I think, now where we stand. We have to get on with exercising these institutions in order to actually solve some of the problems that honourable and right honourable members quite rightly raise. Before I finish, I will simply say this. I commend the right honourable gentleman, the member for Lagan Valley, for his forbearance, his patience, and the way in which he is approaching these issues. I do commend him. It is not an easy position for anybody to be in. All of us will have to make compromises in our political life. Goodness knows that's been something I've had to wrestle with. And I simply say, on behalf of the committee I have the honour of chairing, that he goes with all the goodwill and support that I can muster on behalf of the committee that I chair. And I do hope that 2024 will be a moment not of more pause, not of more political vacuum, but a moment when responsibility can be taken up, the reins of government can be held firmly by my friends in the DUP, and that we can see progress for the people of Northern Ireland that I know everybody wants to see. Thank you.
Sir Geoffrey Donald.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Member for South Swindon for his comments. and wish him well in his ongoing work as Chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, a very important work that it is. And I do want to say also to the Honourable Member for St Helens North, who is not in his place, that of course we recognise that with the pressures on our public services at this time, we want to get to a place where we will see our political institutions restored on a sustainable basis. And as the Shadow Secretary of State reminded us, on a basis that Unionists as well as Nationalists can support. Because that principle of cross-community consensus is at the heart of the Belfast and successor agreements. And it is the key element and principle that enables those institutions to operate in what remains a divided society in Northern Ireland. To be absolutely clear, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Democratic Unionist Party supports the devolution. We support the concept of the people of Northern Ireland being able to elect their representatives and to have good government delivered through those institutions, the Northern Ireland Assembly and the Northern Ireland Executive. And so we are very clear that our objective is twofold. Firstly, to address the issues and the problems created by the Northern Ireland Protocol as part of the withdrawal agreement of 2019-2020,